Welcome to this discussion, which is about dementia and the arts and science and perhaps even society and perhaps other places, wherever the discussion takes us. I'm Jim Edwardson, and it's my pleasure to introduce the participants in the panel this evening. And this program this evening and the play and some other events are the culmination of a project which has run over the last 6 months, a partnership between New Writing North, colleagues of mine at the University of Newcastle in the Institute for Aging Health and the Changing Age programme, and with the Alzheimer's Society and also with Age UK Newcastle. And 3 writers have been exploring the experience of people with dementia and also collaborating with scientists and clinicians, and hopefully we're going to garner the harvest of their thinking in the discussion this evening. So without any further ado, let me introduce Rebecca Jenkins at the end. Rebecca is a writer, and for this project she's produced an animation which is going to be live on the New Writing North website from next week. And then there's Fiona Evans, writer and playwright, who has written Geordie Sinatra, which I guess many of us are going to see this evening, and I'm eagerly looking forward to that. Romi Jones, another writer, a novelist who's recently completed a novel exploring the issues around dementia in a family setting. And then another colleague, a scientist, a writer, a playwright, a poet, and writer in residence at the Institute for Aging and Health, Valerie Laws. And then on my right, for security, Ian McKeith, Professor of Old Age Psychiatry and a world authority on dementia with Lewy bodies. Elaine Perry, a colleague for over 30 years, again an absolutely international pioneer of biochemical research and pathological research on Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. And on my far right, Elizabeta Mukaetova-Ladinska, who's a senior lecturer in old age psychiatry and a clinician. Oh, and as well I've said, I'm Jim Edwardson, and I guess my qualification for being here this evening is I used to be director of the Institute for Aging and Health, but my chief qualification is I'm probably the one in most imminent need of the insights from this 6-month project. So just 2 things before we kick off. 30 years ago, when I came to Newcastle and was interested and involved in dementia research and used to go round the world to conferences, you might fly into Boston or anywhere in the US, and speak to the taxi driver and mention you're going to an Alzheimer's conference, and they would say, ah yes, Rita Hayworth disease, and talk to you kind of animatedly about it. And then you'd come back home and get into Noda taxis, and they'd say, where have you been? And you'd say to a conference on Alzheimer's disease, and they would say, and what's that? There was absolutely no awareness, and you could even ask some GPs about Alzheimer's disease, and they had knowledge roughly similar to a taxi driver's. So the fact that there's a discussion going on this evening, not just about dementia, but about a man who had Lewy body dementia, we're going to hear more about that, that's absolutely terrific and a kind of a real mark of how far we've come. And then the last point, which somebody's got to make, and I might as well make it, of course, is that the term dementia is a catch-all. Dementia refers to a syndrome, that's just a collection of symptoms in which a decline in cognitive ability, that's the gradual loss of memory and reasoning and the ability to perform simple tasks of everyday life. They're the hallmark features. And there are many, many causes of dementia, but 3 of the common causes of dementia are Alzheimer's disease, perhaps as number 1, and then behind Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, which many of us have heard about, and also, as we'll hear more about this evening, Lewy body dementia. So let's get into this now then. So I want to start with Fiona and ask her really kind of, as the author of the play, how this project came about and what has led up to this evening.
Well, my dad was diagnosed with vascular dementia back in 2009, and as a result of that I started doing research into the general subject of dementia, just to really help the family cope and to help support my dad you know, through the disease. And as a result of that, I came across dementia with Lewy bodies, which is a condition where people hallucinate. And my dad actually had hallucinated, even though he didn't have or hasn't been diagnosed with dementia with Lewy bodies. So it was as a dramatist and a playwright, that really interested me. You know, it was a subject, and also just, you know, I felt that it was a subject that I hadn't seen on the stage very much. It hadn't been dealt with, although recently there have been several of the plays that have, you know, that have dealt with the subject, which is brilliant that it's getting out there and raising awareness. So as part of that, I pitched the idea for the play, but my background is really working in the community. I did a community arts course at Northumbria University, and I wanted a community, you know, part arm to the play, really to help give something back, and also in terms of education and raising awareness. So I approached New Writing North, who were fantastic, as they always are when you take them an idea, and they, Claire and Anna, set about raising money for it and found some money from Science City and ERDF, which has helped fund the project and bring Rebecca and Romi on board, and then we started working in the dementia settings, and I think...
Yes, so I mean it would be very useful to ask Rebecca and then perhaps Romi about what they see as the sort of role of artists in raising public awareness of dementia, and what kind of understanding you think you can bring to us from a project like this. Rebecca, do you want to start?
I think
what have you been doing in particular?
Well, I've been working on, alongside people in dementia, who've been labelled with Alzheimer's or dementia, who are attending day centres. And I suppose as all writers, we're actually interested in the human condition. And this is very much about being human, and so that's really what attracted me. Because just because somebody is labelled as having this sequence of identifiable symptoms, I think all three of us care for people or have cared for relatives with either Alzheimer's, dementia or whatever. And if you know somebody and you're alongside them, you know very well that they're still the same person dealing with something, this label that has been put on them. Yes, there's a progression, but what I'm fascinated by is how the label itself in one sense challenges people's humanity, let alone what is actually happening chemically to their brains. And so that was partly, and I felt that often you don't hear the voice of the people who are actually being labelled. What you get is a system of help is put in place, and people are given tests, and support workers come. But nobody actually remembers the person. That's why the what about me, to me, is absolutely essential.
So thanks. Now, and Romi has produced a wonderful pack of flash fiction cards, which I think most of you should have, and if you haven't, ask on your way out. So Romi, tell us about your experience in this project.
Well, I'm, as all three of us, were interested in this idea of the self, and actually had quite a bit of help from our contact with the scientists as well about thinking. I think Julian Hughes in particular gave us some ideas about how you think about the self. But at the same time wanting to kind of forget some of those the sort of strictures about how to think about things by just actually being with people with dementia. And I think for me, for somebody who's actually worked with older people, my mother had Alzheimer's, it was fabulous to just forget all of those responsibilities and to be with people with dementia and actually really tune into their conversation and their views. And my set of flash fiction have come out of a whole set of, well, 20 sessions with older people with dementia. And it's kind of, obviously the aim of the project is about raising awareness, but it's also capturing that spirit that even though people may not be able to remember what they had for breakfast, by golly, they can still give you their views on Mrs. Thatcher, or, you know, footballers' pay, or what they did, you know, down at Whitley Bay. It's fascinating.
Thanks. That's great. Now, so Val, who, as I said, has been a writer in residence at the Institute for Aging and Health and has written some wonderful poetry. You probably spent more time rubbing alongside scientists
Yes.
than kind of anyone else on the platform. And indeed, you started life as a mathematician and a physicist. So do you have a view on the kind of attitudes of the scientists that you've come across, and whether their empathy for people with dementia is different to that from kind of the public generally? Do you think there are special issues for scientists in the field?
I think a lot of the scientists who are doing the pure research tend to be dealing with dead brains, which I have also spent quite a lot of time dealing with, so you don't really need much empathy there, I suppose. But perhaps the more frontline staff like GPs and hospital staff are the ones who might need to know more about the science of what's happening to a person with dementia, that it's not madness. And you know, if you have some kind of understanding of what's physically happening in the brain, I think it helps you understand that the person is just a person with some damage, just in the same way that someone with a broken leg is somebody who's damaged, and they are still the same person, and they still deserve to be treated with dignity. I certainly have been working with scientists in Newcastle for several years, before, and also in London, and I have found the scientists have been incredibly helpful and very open to approaches from people like myself and writers and artists, and very interested in seeing their work interpreted in a different way. And I think one of the things that we can do is to interpret the science research to a general audience, and that in turn will help people to understand what dementia means and what it involves.
Okay, now can I, again, kind of, we've carefully divided the scientists to the right because they're right, as Ian said, and the creative types to the left. Working with people with dementia, have you changed your views at all about the impact or the importance of actual involvement in creative work for the person with dementia, and kind of what the impact is and so on? Would any of you like to make a comment on that?
I think my first reaction was it's actually about time, because as I mentioned before, I'm very interested about labels and the way people approach problems. And very rarely do people who are either old or labelled as having memory problems, very rarely do they have anybody who's prepared to sit down alongside them and actually get through whatever communication problems they may have. Because one of the biggest things I find is lack of confidence, is that people, if nobody listens to you and nobody sees you for a long time, whoever you are, whether it's just you're ill or with something else, you can't speak very well anymore. And so, at least if you are there because you're interested in the human being who's sitting before you, as artists, that's generally what you're sent in to do, then you are prepared to take the time to hear the person. And what is, I found startling, is how you can have somebody who seems to be gone or just fairly neutral, but if you actually give them the confidence to know that you're there and you see them, it's amazing what you will then experience.
Yeah,
and so that was quite rewarding in its own way.
I think even the coalition government would agree that access to, I'm not giving anything away, am I?
Yeah.
That access to kind of art and so on is almost a kind of a right, which is why we have free museums and all sorts of stuff that's paid for out of the public person. Yet these people who perhaps, you know, are most could most benefit from it are so often denied. And I know there are a lot of artists in tonight, and you'll have your chance to speak up in a moment, but I think kind of what artists are doing increasingly with people with dementia is really wonderful, and we need to see far more of that. So there's a hard question though, as more artists become involved in interacting with people with dementia, there's an issue of, do the kind of things that artists do with people with dementia, do they just kind of improve mood temporarily, or do they have any kind of effect in maintaining cognition or slowing down the rate of decline in dementia? Elizabeta, have you got a view on that?
Well, I came prepared, I have to say, because I've got my personal views, but I have to demonstrate my professional views as well. As a professional, I have to be guided by evidence-based. So I have to, this is my NHS hat. So I have to clarify, actually. And indeed, studies are not conclusive. Music therapy has been shown to decrease agitation, to improve behavior, etc. Also, but it is only transiently. It's improving while the sessions are being conducted, but if you leave a gap of about 2 to 3 months, the benefits are disappearing. Physical activities as well, written words, spoken words, visual arts, similarly have got only a transient effect. Yet there is non-evidence-based research, qualitative research, and there are several studies that are published not in our medical journals that show that stimulation 6 times a week over a prolonged period of time actually slows down the cognitive decline. Engagement with words, with literacy, with storytelling in particular has been found to be very, very useful. So in other words, actually I don't think that what we are doing on our clinical research time-wise is proving the benefits for the long term. It's funding, it's anecdotal stuff, etc. And I was thinking of a parallel. It's like being taught to play an instrument for about 3 months. Within 3 months, you can play sailing with 2 fingers, right? But after 3 months not playing the instruments, you cannot be expected to perform B minor Tchaikovsky, am I right? Not even sailing with 1 finger. So that is basically the parallelism, parallel comparisons that I can make. So sustained long-term involvement seems to be better. And I think that all of us, once you haven't given a speech for a long time and then you're put on the spot, well, you'll have the butterflies, you will be underperforming, but with practice you will improve. So I'm sure that the same principles are worthwhile. And I was very much intrigued about the storytelling, the use of words. Because we are using words, and you would be surprised that actually even in clinical practice we are using words. Words to listen, words to examine, words to detect the symptoms. And also, and I'm sure that Ian will confirm, that we have mastered the artistry of the secret meaning of the words and phrases. I'm not sleeping means, well, I'm a nightmare. You should ask my wife. He's not sleeping means we made tea 2 o'clock in the morning. By 2:30 he had cooked breakfast. 3 o'clock he was dressed up and out he went going to work. So we are using words, and I think that arts, especially the written form, the word form of arts, is very important for finding out the secret meaning of the words, and it is a very, very powerful tool that we have every day that we use.
So, given the importance of these kinds of interactions, can I ask you, what the NHS does to kind of promote this kind of activity, and what's your view of a clinician generally about access to things which are clearly kind of so valuable, and we could argue a part of people's rights in any case?
Well, certainly we don't prescribe storytelling on the NHS.
Should.
But I'm sorry. But we've got snoozling rooms. We used to have one, and I think it's still active on our wards. Also, we've got very proactive, at least in Newcastle, very proactive psychology team that's very much interested in non-pharmacological treatments, and storytelling, use of words, musical therapy are actually non-pharmacological treatments. Elaine is on the far front of non-pharmacological treatments, and we're also doing a project, not still under the NHS umbrella, but I hope that it will be, on vibration, gong therapy, and basically stimulating the subcortex, which is very powerful part of the brain because it is our emotional brain. And in the long term of dementia, when the cortex is affected, when we're talking about Alzheimer's disease and other forms of cortical forms of dementia, the subcortex still remains, the emotions, the anger, love are still there intact. And that is actually another way why arts, artistic expression, are very important for people with dementia.
So thanks, Elizabeta. Now, this isn't question time, but I think this might be a useful point, since this is clearly such an important subject. The benefits of such interventions in improving the mood and well-being of someone with dementia is now kind of evidence-based, but yet the story of the social care of people with dementia is lamentable in so many ways, and there's kind of so little available. And I'm sure there must be those of you who are working with people in the community with dementia, or kind of have views of your own or questions of your own about the availability of recourse to these sorts of... so is there anyone who wants to make a point or a step? Yes,
I think answering your point about prescribing or having an artistic sort of prescription, there's a surgery in Wallsend that actually prescribes writing, creative writing, and knitting, and other types of art forms. That's actually on the NHS.
Did everyone catch that? That's a very progressive surgery in Wallsend, prescribing knitting. I might try and get on the register. Yeah, anyone else want to? Yeah?
Yeah, is implied memory a key to some of these activities, including music being valuable? I'm thinking of two trivial examples, two odd examples. One, the piano player who had a disease which wiped out his long-term memory, not his short-term memory. But he could still sit at a piano, play a bit of music. He said, "What's that about?" And at the other end of the scale, Ronald Reagan, after he'd forgotten he was president, could still not at time perfectly well. And I wonder if in some of artistic activities they could be unlocking abilities that people still have, even though they may appear to be severely in difficulties in other ways. I don't know, I'm just wondering if implied memory, or the intuitive memory almost.
Okay, so there is a principle I was told, which is kind of in dementia, it's often last in, first out, and clearly if someone spent their childhood playing music or not at a tie for school every day for 10 years or something like that at a very early stage of their life, on that principle alone it would be likely. But Ian, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think that's called Rebo's law.
Is it? Oh, yes.
And it sort of demonstrates that we're really preoccupied in the health service and the clinical service with deficits, with what people can't do, and we don't think about really asking, well, what can people do, and what do they like doing, what do they get pleasure from? Because if you don't ask those questions, you're never going to be in a position to prescribe that activity particularly. I have to say, I think that my colleagues on the left are probably better at that kind of interactive activity than me, at least.
Well, they've got time for it as well.
Yeah, well, that's right. So I think there's an interesting question about what should different people provide in terms of their specialism. So people are looking to the scientists for prevention and cure and insight and knowledge. So I think we've got to be a bit careful that there would be a danger in a sense that a lot of healthcare professionals could find themselves engaging in things that they actually enjoy doing. It wasn't really person with dementia focused at all. The other thing I've seen through my association with this project, or these projects, has been really that through the engagement of people with dementia and the folk around them, the families and the carers, you can use devices to educate people and inform people that I can't. When people come to my clinic, they're afraid, they're nervous, they're anxious. It doesn't matter what I do to try and relax them. That is how it is. I can't easily use humour, for instance, to try and educate people. What those of you who see the play tonight will see a lot of humour about delivering a message. Some of you will have heard David Cameron's announcement a couple of weeks ago around dementia as the national challenge, the national priority. In that, the report that went with it, it says that dementia is now the thing that people are most afraid of. They're more afraid of it than cancer. Some people in mid and sort of later life, that's what they're afraid of. The reason largely they're afraid of it is because they don't understand it, they don't know what it means, they just know it's sort of negative somehow, that it can't be cured or treated. Whereas cancer, to some extent, everybody knows a story about somebody with cancer who's recovered from cancer, so that there's an optimistic element. And that's why people don't go to get diagnosed. Less than half of people who've got dementia have a diagnosis. It's fear that keeps them away. So I think the real opportunity is for people like me, who are the diagnosticians and the people who are with the treatments, is to understand the power of this other component and constituency in delivering the message out, so that people are going to come to me and people like me. So it's interactive, I think. That would be my view on it.
Great. So,
can I just make one more point, sir?
Yeah, of course.
I think that Rebecca sort of said that support workers don't enter into giving time for entering into conversation and dialogue with people with dementia. I work for an organisation that devotes itself to giving time to people with dementia, which is the Dementia Care Project. And I mean, personally, I work with about 10 people a week, and a lot of that is just sitting and talking and entering dialogue with people.
So, well, don't misunderstand my remarks. This kind of wasn't a blanket verdict, but what amazes me is you can go now, I would think, almost into any hospital in the UK, say a general hospital, and you can sit in casualty, or you can sit in some of the clinics, and I have sat in clinics and seen older people go with someone, and the secretary says, sorry, there's not enough room, only the patient to be admitted, without actually asking at all, without even considering whether the person has dementia. And there've been a whole string of reports, and what was the most recent one? Dignity in Care, pointing out the fact that many basic employees in acute care don't have that understanding of dementia, and the staff, including the non-nursing and medical staff, aren't trained in that simple awareness that, if you have a group of old people, and many of the clinics I can think about are just full of elder people, a significant number of those in that clinic may be suffering from at least the early stages of kind of cognitive decline. So, and there is brilliant work going on. How we can actually increase that is, I don't know, has anyone got any ideas on that, about actually increasing it?
I'm very interested in the statement made by Ian McKeith that it's what people can do that matters.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think a lot of the fear of Alzheimer's or any form of dementia that we personally have, the pact that might exist between my wife and I, that if we become batty, we'll shoot at the other, is really something which is not tractable to therapy for the patient, it's therapy for society in general. And therapy particularly for the relatives. If we behave like the Chinese, for example, who venerate their older people even after they have, or in the old Chinese culture, after they have become demented, then we might have a somewhat healthier society in which the children of demented parents would give them the time. It's not principally a matter of bringing art to the purpose of therapy for what Elizabeta described as a transient effect, but actually the permanent effects that art could achieve by encouraging people to understand the whole business of becoming elderly, which is part of the human condition. We are all, to some extent, going to lose something. But it's what we retain, that element that still makes us human, that makes us valuable, that we should be actually focusing upon. And that's the feeling I get about where art belongs here. I think of Rodin, I'm a sculptor amongst other things, I think of Rodin's sculpture of she who was once the helmet maker's beautiful wife, La Vieille Aulmière, who is a woman who appears to have almost deflated and collapsed. And yet you understand that this woman was once a beautiful woman, and it actually shines through in the sculpture, and you can see that. That, I think, is an age-positive message, a positive message about somebody who now appears to be the other side of some divide, which the rest of us, the younger ones, can't reach. And I think somehow that's where art needs to be, helping to reunite people either side of that gap of age and of dementia, because what remains is still so very much more
So
important.
thank you. I mean, that's really kind of a wonderful summing up of so many of the issues that we've discussed this afternoon. I don't know whether any of the artists would
I
like
mean,
to
I was
comment
at an Arts and Dementia conference at the Ark in Stockton a few months back, and there was a wonderful project. I'm not quite sure who ran it, so if anybody here knows about it, then tell me. But it was fantastic. It was a group of young people who'd been working on a drama project, and it was about understanding aging and dementia, and they, these young people were just fantastic. This spoke so well about what they'd learned, and how art had given them a greater understanding and drama of the issues concerned. And I thought, that should be in all schools. That type of work should be done as part of the curriculum, really, because it was so powerful.
It is, but in one sense, I think the elephant in the room is that it actually, dementia and ageing, the society's attitudes to it reflect a mirror back to society. And the trouble is, we live in a world that has no time, that values people who earn lots of money, and that's how we assess whether people are valuable. And therefore, in one sense, it's not really not surprising that everybody's terrified of growing old, because what they're facing is the idea of my redundancy. I'm going to be faced with the idea of all of a sudden I'm not myself anymore because I haven't got my job, I haven't got my income I used to have, people don't react to me in the same way. And that is such a fundamental question about society that obviously arts should be involved in it, because art is trying to engage with present day's sort of human condition. But it's also a very social thing, in the sense that, at the moment we have a society, the government has to be dominated by budgets. Who do they listen to? They have to listen to somebody who seems to have checkable data, which will be the scientists. They can't actually think about what are the social conditions that you're surrounding old people will be us when we are older. And so this is such a wide subject. In a way, you're diverting the central argument if you only talk about science or arts. I don't know whether I'm being clear there, but I think it's a sort of wider subject.
Well, you are, yeah, and and it is an elephant in the room. There is no one I think I've ever spoken to, and I've spoken to people sort of fairly senior in government and so on, who on a one-to-one basis, if they know they're not being taped, won't readily admit that social care, for instance, in this country is simply not fit for purpose. But because the reform of social care is such a huge and kind of expensive and difficult thing, and also because any changes will exceed the time limit of any government. Repeated governments of all complexions just totally kicked the ball into the long grass. I mean, once again, this year we're due for a paper on the future of care, but how will it be funded, and kind of what will the message be for people with dementia and those who are caring with dementia?
That also, just as an evidentiary thing, when people talk about social care, it's always that model of giving old people to strangers to look after. And then they get really upset because the strangers are not paid that much, and they beat up on the old people because they're not their old people. And everybody says it's a great scandal. But if, say, I mean, many of us will know who've been carers, what happens to you is you start out as a straightforward professional person with a career and all the rest of it, and then you start caring for somebody because they are your loved one. And then all of a sudden you're a servant, and you're supposed to be paid less than, you know, minimum wage, because it's a vocation to care for somebody. And yet you've got a society that thinks that is justified. You know, if you look at the actual tax breaks or whatever, what do you get as a carer's allowance? Is it enough to live on? Probably not. But it's supposed to be a very valuable service to the society to look after old people. But actually, what you really do when you enact what people say, the words mean nothing in a way.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I don't know whether there's anyone else here this evening who wants to comment on the inadequacies or otherwise of the social care support they've had for
Can I just chuck
someone
something
dementia.
in?
Sorry, yeah, Romi.
We all did 20 sessions with older people in day centre and saw some brilliant work. And but one of the things that really struck me about some of the older people is their awareness of their own condition and their awareness of being a burden on society, which I think is one of the things that scares us most. But one of the things which I personally found fascinating about this project was that because of the link with scientists, it sort of opened up my mind. And one of the older women that I was talking to, they'd all just arrived and were having a cup of tea, and this little woman, older woman, said to me, "Look at that group of women over there. They're all. Have you ever seen a group of women so quiet?" And I said, "Well, they're just having their coffee. That's why they're quiet. They've just arrived." And she said, "No, somebody must have given them glue." And I thought immediately of all of these scientists and politicians and economic people thinking, "Oh my God, we've got all of these older people, let's give them glue, let's shut them up." But actually, what it really made me think is what will happen in the future. You know, we've got this situation, we keep talking about how it's not, you know, we're not able to deal with the situation. And I got a kind of Margaret Atwood sort of dystopian fiction, which I never write, but because of this project, it made me actually think how terrifying it could be and how older people in that state are actually quite fearful because they know they are a burden on society and they know that is a fearful place to be.
We're dangerously close to the river, and before anybody goes out and hoys themselves in, I just think perhaps we need to reflect on that. One of the things we've done in Newcastle for the last 5 years is run the so-called 85 plus study in Newcastle, which has been the first really big longitudinal study of the oldest old, the group who are at greatest risk of dementia. And actually, when you look at the results that have come out of that study, you know, there's kind of great cause for hope. First of all the 1,000, I think it was, of 85 plus year olds, and that included those in nursing homes and residential homes, and those in sheltered accommodation, only 10% were in nursing homes. So it's only a 1 in 10 of the 85 plus who are in. I think 13% is in sheltered accommodation. Something like, was it 76% of people, when they were asked, thought that their health was excellent, very good, or good compared to their peers. And most of them would agree that, you know, their self-perceived kind of quality of life what was great. And actually, when you see what relatively small sums of money are still put into social care and so on in relation to our expenditure in other domains, and I'll not even mention bankers, I think, you know, the possibility for doing very, very much more with a really kind of radical... We need to stand the whole kind of pyramid of healthcare on its head. But one issue which arises from this, of course, it might not be necessary if we've got a magic bullet, if we've got a cure. Now, 30 years ago, when I got interested in this field, I don't think there was anyone working in dementia research who didn't feel that we would have this licked in a couple of decades. And the reason for this is in Alzheimer's disease, the brain has such a characteristic pathology. Part of the diagnosis is kind of really post-mortem. You look at the brain and there are so-called plaques, which are deposits of abnormal protein, and the tangles, these are again disordered protein within nerve cells. And I just felt that kind of, because these changes are so physical, you can see them and you can measure them. Elaine spent a lot of time measuring them with colleagues and so on, that there must be ways of preventing this. We've had 40 years of scientific breakthroughs. At least once a month on the telly they will announce there's been another breakthrough, but we don't appear to be getting any nearer to an effective therapy. So Elaine and then Ian, perhaps, why is that? Where are we going?
I feel a bit like the fish out of water. I was once a straight scientist, and this conversation hasn't been about science, really. 40 years ago, as Jim said, I went into this with a very exciting group of researchers in Newcastle, and we all firmly believed, based on what Jim says, what the brain looks like, that it would just be a matter of time till we discovered what drug was going to solve this disease. And you wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be here tonight if we'd succeeded. And so what went wrong with this vision? If you think of heart disease, you think of cancer, think of all the amazing progressive treatments that have emerged to make life much, much better and much, much more hopeful than we've got in the dementia field. So where did we go wrong? Perhaps there isn't a single cause, perhaps there's a lot of different kinds of Alzheimer's disease, perhaps we're all going to get it if we live to 150. Who knows, but that's the failure to deliver this magic bullet is why so many of us, and I was a straight scientist once, but I've deviated off that path. I thought to myself, with the frustration of having given this energy to this area and not seeing what we had hoped for, that we have to look somewhere else. So my current plan is to find the answer within a plant which is reputed to cure memory, and there are lots of plants that do that. But I can't offer you that today. I could give you some advice outside the theatre, but I won't say it today officially. So that's how many of us who started as straight science, and Jim must agree, we were on straight, weren't we? Yeah. But you're talking about health policies and social support, and I'm talking about complementary medicines. How did we end up here from there? I haven't got the answer. And I was talking to Ian tonight, you know, is there something coming up? And maybe Ian, you'd like to tell us.
Well, it's not just us. I mean, the fact is worldwide, the global pharmaceutical companies who spend billions and billions of dollars in research, many of them are getting out of this area big time and folding programs which have been so promising, we thought, over the years. Ian, what's your take on this?
No, that's, well, generally positive, because I think, you know, compared with 20 years ago, we do have treatments for Alzheimer's disease now. Okay, they're limited, they're not cures, but nonetheless, for a lot of people, they've made a big difference, and people go out and seek these treatments. So, you know, I'm positive about it. I think that there isn't a huge breakthrough about to happen, I don't think. The great hope has been this vaccine therapy, immunotherapy, to stop these brain changes. There'll be 3 big trials report in this summer. I think that those of us who know the field think that these aren't going to be huge successes, and that'll have its repercussions for the drug companies. It'll lose a lot of money. There will be less interested in it. But I really think that we've been a bit naive. First of all, we haven't had enough funding. Everybody says that, but for cancer, there's 8 times as much money put into cancer research as dementia research still now. That is being addressed. You know, this government have announced a doubling over the next 3 years in funding. We just need to keep doubling every few years, and so you've got to get to that level. Second thing is, cancer treatments are complicated. You don't just get one silver bullet, you get lots of things done to you in a sequence, generally speaking. And that's, I think, where dementia treatment will be. It'll be a complicated treatment, not a simple tablet that you take. And the real future, I think, is in prevention. It's prevention. It's modifying the things that will cause you to accumulate brain damage and get dementia. So, you know, it would take too long to explain the different options, but it's lifestyle modification, it's controlling your blood pressure, your cholesterol, and those things in midlife that will make the difference. And even the exercise and engagement thing is probably as important, more important in early and midlife as when things start to unravel at the end. That's not the time to start doing crosswords and ballroom dancing and, you know, going to art class.
So do we really need to know at, say, 50, the people who are at risk? And how are we going to find that out? Is it going to be a genetic test or some kind of biochemical blood profile or what?
I think predicting who will get Alzheimer's disease is a dangerous game. I mean, I think already there's a fearfulness around all older people, which is unnecessary. 5% of the population over the age of 65 have dementia. 95% don't. Yeah, and that, you know, that's the message we need to promote. I think that to go on a quest, as they are doing in the States now, to diagnose Alzheimer's disease before you have symptoms, preclinical Alzheimer's disease. This is based on a brain scan that shows the proteins in your brain. Whether it really predicts whether you're going to get dementia or not is not proved. We don't have a treatment to prevent it, so why would you want to know, particularly? I think that's a wrong direction of travel, actually. I mean, I think at a population level, there are general messages that will probably be helpful in the whole population. You may be in a rare family where there's a family history of Alzheimer's disease. That's different. That's completely different. You then would go and try and get an accurate risk evaluation. But that's a rare situation. So I think that the message about dementia being common has to be handled very carefully to avoid panic, actually. I think that the Alzheimer's Society and others like it, wonderful as they are, every year the report is about how many more hundreds of thousands of people have got dementia. And you know, so, okay, so how's that helping us? You know, what's the use of that information? We know it's common. Coming in on the radio this morning, though, I listened to the news, and I heard there were 3 or 4 million people with diabetes currently, and that's going to double in the next few years. So, you know, this idea that we're going to help dementia by saying there's nearly 1 million people is nonsense, because that isn't actually the key. It's the scale of the problem if you get dementia. That's the killer. It's the chaos and disruption and distress and loss that goes around dementia. That's, yeah, okay. And if there's a lot of that happening, then it is a sort of a large-scale problem. So I think we need to tailor the messages carefully, talk like this and figure out what you know, what we know, what you know, and share it somehow, and then parcel it out responsibly. And in this country, I think we've got a chance to do that. I think there are other parts of the world where, you know, there'll be other...
America.
Yeah, I think in the US there's a danger that the consumer approach to this will actually not benefit them particularly.
So I think that's a really, really positive message. And Ian ought to be on the 6 o'clock news at least twice a week, kind of saying that. Now, Val, yes, I was going to ask you. Yes, so Val, as I said, you know, started life as a kind of research life as a physicist and so on, and you've worked with, you know, a whole range of scientists here. Kind of, what would be your take on this?
And I've also worked, obviously, with people with dementia and helped to care for my mother, so I've kind of experienced it from that point of view. I think these were very important points that obviously as people get older the incidence of dementia goes up, so the longer more people live, the more people will end up getting it who would have died of something else first in the past, so it's not such a bad news thing as it sounds. And also it's important to remember that the 85 plus study, I worked with quite a lot of people in that, and a lot of them were still driving. Well, when I was working with them they were 90 to 91, and a lot of them are featured in my book. And some of them, quite a lot of them were using computers, and older people make a massive contribution to society. They're not just people in care homes and people with dementia. Dementia is very important to deal with, but it's also important to remember that old people aren't necessarily all in care homes with dementia. They're not all costing the state a fortune. A lot of them are making positive contributions financially, and they've all got votes, which I think the government should remember, and the fact that there's more and more of them should be making them a bit more careful about how they dismiss people. But I think the scientists should be, it should be remembered that a drug like Aricept, which is the result of the work by people like Elaine and her colleagues, is still the standard drug and it still works, and that's another reason for people to get an early diagnosis. It doesn't cure, but it will hold up the disease for a certain amount of time and give you a longer functional life. It certainly did for my mother, and the sooner you take that, the higher level of function you will have for longer. So progress has been made, and I think it will carry on being made, but all this about predicting, to me, that sounds like the insurance companies in America. And if they identify you as someone who might get dementia, you won't get health insurance, and that's what that's about. That is not about treatment.
Thanks, and you also brought up a point there, which is very common, this kind of almost universal cry of woe, that it's older people that cost the NHS a bomb. It's not older people at all, it's sick people. It's the most of the expenditure on the NHS occurs in the last 3 or 4 years of a person's life, probably less than that, irrespective of what age you die at. I mean, if tomorrow there was some virus or some condition suddenly brought, you know, life expectancy massively down, you know, so we started to fade off at 55 rather than kind of 85, do you think the government would be spending less money on the NHS? No, they wouldn't. They'd be spending a lot more. All the evidence is actually that it's younger people who get more spent on them in terms of kind of their final years with the NHS. So there's a massive amount of kind of morbid mythology out there. But I thought these statements that we've had were really good news. Now it's just past 6 o'clock. That's when we were officially supposed to end. We've got a few moments more, but I think that the kind of the sort of perspective that Ian has brought to this, and the ultimate hope that one day, with the appropriate investment, you know, there will be real kind of preventative strategies and more substantial treatments for dementia, is probably a good note to wrap up the scientific side of this. From the other side, I just want to say 3 things as a scientist, or a retired scientist, or a semi-retired scientist. I mean, I think it's just been thrilling to see the way in which you as artists are able to raise public awareness of this condition. I was actually speaking to an older people's group over in Roker earlier today, and they'd all heard about what was going on tonight and wanted to know about it and so on. So I thought that was absolutely terrific. And as Ian said, you're far better able than we are to explore the real human side of that, what it is to have dementia, and to focus on the kind of the positive things, so many of them that remain. And then my last word would be, there's an expression, we've heard a lot of it recently, and who knows, it may be written on the tombstone of a government one day. We're all in this together. Yeah, that brings a laugh, doesn't it? But you know, I think in the community of people who are kind of involved, whether it's in research about dementia, or care about dementia, or kind of exploring personhood in dementia, the more people we bring into it from the more varied backgrounds, I think we have kind of the more sense of that we are really all in this together. And so I think, you know, you've had a most invaluable role in actually providing cement, as it were, to this view that sometimes we have, that we're kind of fighting this and we're a bit on our own and we're not supported and so on. And you have shown us in so many, many ways that really we are all in this together, and it's a challenge we all face, and we could all face personally, and all our families are likely to face it sooner or later. But thank you for a wonderful contribution from everyone, and I hope the audience agree with me. It has been a terrific evening, and I hope you've learnt as much as I have. So would you like to show your appreciation?